Maybe we should have as much time as possible for the audience to raise additional issues, but maybe just one thing to start off, because what Paul mentions about all these other cases, I mean, I know this point was raised before. I'm just wondering, maybe to Wallace and Gracie, why are public passageways or street walk widenings not included so far? Because I would also say, from my New York experience, maybe studying New York, it's different there. Do you want to comment on this?
Okay. The reason why we try to separate the public passageway from the parks actually is we don't want to confuse the two types of spaces, which in fact, during the process, we study from two big framework. One is the overall condition of whether the open spaces, including even parks, including all the spaces which is belonging to the public, street conditions, passage, and all these things. And then we try to zoom in what we are considering as the POSPD, which has a different ideas of how the management side and the use of that can be more specifically concluded. Because I understand your concern about the passageway, because in the legal terms and also in terms of use, supposedly most of those passageway is basically intended for passage only. I think why they approve it. The passage width actually is also dedicated just supposedly enough for the flow of people, which is not intended at the beginning to allow for, say, cultural use or some other uses. So these are two different intentions to allow different kinds of spaces. For what we're talking about, the POSPD, I think this has a very another intention of allowing these spaces to be enjoyed by the public as kind of more leisure places. So I think this is why we try to separate the two. In fact, we are not saying that we're not going to study the passageway again, and also in further details. For the moment, we try to conclude the first part of that, the POSPD, and try to learn from that experience and go back to it, whether the public passageway can be dealt with, in a more specific task. I think this is why we try to conclude the two parts.
Just to add on what Wallace said, we do not actually exclude passageway from the POSPD. We actually have a section on passageway. But as Wallace have explained how we come up with this proposed guidelines, passageway can be of, again, very different conditions. It really depends on the conditions of the passageway. Some of the examples you've shown are more spacious passageway. I also mentioned in my presentation that to a lay person, many more spacious passageway are very much akin to POSPD, but not all passageways are like that. And again, this is going to be, it should be a live document, an evolving document. So I like the idea of commending good examples, because like seating arrangements, that is a common issue, whether it is POSPD or more spacious passageway. If we can find a way to commend good examples, we also encourage people to understand and have a culture here in Hong Kong that what are the better designs, what are the better developers? Yes. Who are the better developers? How come we have such facilities? Because you really need to prescribe to details in order to get what you need under the present environment. Otherwise, I'm not going to say anything good about developers. I know there are people representing developers interested, and there are very good reasons, because they are profit-driven. And so you can see how when things are not prescribed to such detail, they would tend to put, for example, cost to the residential section of a development, because that would be sold out. And they tend not to put cost on the commercial section of development, which will be retained by the developer. That is the fact of life that we are dealing with.
Thank you. Maybe I have one other question which maybe fits well to this, because when we play the ball to the developer side, and it's the developer's fault. I mean, I found very interesting when I went to Beijing last week, and I looked at Solitude. Development is actually by Swire here in Hong Kong, and I was very surprised to see this kind of quality of connectivity on the ground for our answer. So I wondered why this is not possible here. Of course, it has to do with densities and so on. But maybe just to Chris, maybe because he was somehow involved, that is maybe the last question here, and then we move on to the audience.
Yes, maybe I'll quickly explain the Sanlitun Village concept. It started 5-6 years ago when we did the master plan for the local government. It was 1.5 million square feet of mixed-use commercial development. Now, instead of doing a single building, what we did was to plan around 30 buildings. So lots and lots of small buildings with lanes and squares and alleys between them. And the plot ratio was 1.5. So it's a relatively mid-rise development. The reason why that happened was the local government firstly zoned that as a special zone for culture, creative industry, commerce, retail, food and beverage, and allow special dispensation for that area. And secondly, when we first did the master plan, we actually did it for a company which is an offshoot of the local government, and they actively encouraged that kind of development. Now, it is only when after the development plan had been completed and the foundation of the building were half built that they sold the site to a private sector developer. So the private sector developer took over it and enhanced it and then changed the individual buildings and also allowed the individual operators, such as let's say Nike or Apple computer, to change some of the buildings. So now that, in a way, is a kind of public-private partnership. In that the private sector took over an initiative from the public sector, improve its financial and commercial viability, and yet still keep the public realm of the original master plan. But at the same time, allowing a lot of the operators, the retailers, the operators, to come and change the individual buildings. Now in Hong Kong, we don't have that. In Hong Kong, we just have a single site, usually given to a single developer or joint venture consortium. But the minute you do that, of course, the instinct, as Roger quite well put, is to do it in an entirely private way, and it's only natural because that's the nature of the animal. So I think government has a major role to play in ensuring that public realm is consistently present in all the buildings in city development. Now the other area where the government could play a role is in the ongoing management of the public spaces or the public realm in private ownership. In fact, in China, there is that tradition with the street neighborhood committee, which play an important role in how those spaces are used, what kind of management regime would be placed. Now, none of those is actually in place in Hong Kong.